welcome to the video. Today we'll be looking at how limited these limited sustain units that come in honkaistarrail really are. So when looking at the roles and goals of each of the units, we have the damaging ones, the amplifying ones, and also the sustain ones. The damaging ones, their goal is to output damage as much as possible, and their damage can rise indefinitely. There is always a higher damage number that can be achieved from one unit to another. In the same way, from an amplifying role, there is always another way to have a higher multiplier, and that multiplier number can increase indefinitely as well. The sustain role, which is your preservation and abundance, they maintain the team function. That's what it means to sustain. And that is through, one, preventing death from your attacks, damage over time, and your defense reduction, which increases the multipliers taken. And that can be done through shields, healing, and damage reduction. And also preventing debuffs from affecting you, that prevent you from playing, from your team playing in its configuration. So these could be stat drops, kit restrictions, and also action restrictions such as freeze, entanglement, and imprisonment, which reduces you in the action order. Now, generally, I've experienced that about 10% of losses or restarts are around the debuffs, but most of the time it's around the damage taken. As you can see, the issue here is that the ideal sustain wants to prevent death and prevent debuffs. There is nothing more exceptional that you can do aside from these things, from the pure sustaining role. If you consider something like the Wally unit, which just make up, he'll grant you a basic on a skill point, and if he sets up a wall, he just prevents all damage and debuffs. There's no old talent or traces. I don't care if he reduces all allies' HP to 1, all allies' defense to 0, and all effect resistance to 0. Nobody is getting affected by any of the enemy's turns. It basically invalidates all of the enemy's actions. Would you pull this unit? Now, Wally is an analog for just setting up a wall on the opponent, and the truest sustain would be this kind of walling unit that prevents the enemies from doing anything to affect your team play. So if we compare to our current list of sustains to a Wally unit, we have some criteria we can go through. We are going to be comparing the limited ones, which is Luocha, Fushuan, Huohuo, and Adventurine. Then there's the 5-star sustains that you get from the standard banner, Bailu and Japard, as well as the 4-starred ones, Gallagher, Lynx, Natasha, March 7th, and the Fire MC. So comparing Luocha to Wally, both of them I would say can solo sustain. They both can generate a skill point, as Luocha uses basic attacks. Their debuff prevention, Wally can resist everything, but Luocha only cleanses once every 2 turns, if an ally drops below half, which comes around every now and then, and it's passively, so there's no external actions that need to happen. On skill, it is available on demand. However, Luocha should not be using his skill very often, so out of 10, I put this around the order of 5. It's okay, it's useful, but it's not the greatest. His other benefits, though, he does have an AoE ult, and that one can strip debuffs. However, the amount of strippable debuffs it varies from time points in the game, but it is an asset nonetheless. Fushuan, she can also solo sustain. However, her skill point positivity is a lot less because every 3 turns she needs to flip to put up the matrix. She can be immune to 1 debuff every 2 turns, and this is quite passive as well. Immunity is generally regarded higher than cleansing because it is more active and it does not need the debuff to take effect, especially for ones like imprisonment and entanglement that reduce your place in the action order. She does have an AoE ult and 12% crit rate to all team members. Huohuo, which is the next one, she can also solo sustain. Her skill point positivity is once again not as high because every 3 turns she needs to put a skill so that her passive healing can activate, and that'll also activate the cleansing action, which happens on when allies takes turns. You can cleanse up to six debuffs every time, and this is a very high amount in comparison. It pretty much invalidates all debuffs that happen on your ally's turn. One of the other assets is that she can give 20% energy to all allies and 40% attack. So while there's lower skill point generation, she does have make up for it in other ways. Adventuring can definitely solo sustain and is very skill point positive at a +1, as his chip damage reapplies shield, and he never has to actively put on a shield again. His debuff prevention is also very incredible, because he himself is also immune to debuffs once every 2 turns, and the shield he gives on your allies, which is pretty much all the time, is 50% effect resistance, so everyone has a high amount of effect resistance throughout. Additional parts of his kit, he does have extra bits of chip damage when he procs the 7 counts, and his ultimate is single target and gives you an extra crit damage increase. If we look at our basic ones, our basic standard units, we have Bailu. She herself, it is possible to solo sustain, also with skill point positivity. Debuff prevention is where everyone faults her for, and I'm giving her a flat 0, but she does have the ability to cleanse death once, so she is far more in the camp that she can prevent the damage, but not the debuffs. Japard can also solo sustain. He is also skill point positive, as you're not using the freeze ability very often. It is able to be used in certain circumstances, but in most standard play, you will not be using the freeze skill. So he is also skill point positive. Debuff prevention, I gave him a 1 because more attacks are slightly drawn to him, and his role is not as essential as your other damaging and amplifying units. So an increased taunt kind of increases the ability for your other allies to function as desired. And he does have ability to cleanse his own death, which supports his active tauntness on the field more often. Gallagher can solo sustain for sure. He is actually more than +1 on skill points, because every 3 turns when he ults, he gets another ability to use a basic attack again. So every 3 turns, he gets an extra basic attack during that ultimate. He himself can cleanse on skill, but he generally would not be using skill very often. But when he does, there is an extra effect resistance associated with it. His E1 also gives him 50% effect res, so attacks targeted at him actually don't have as high of a chance of affecting his performance either. He also has high break amounts, which plays into the role of the super break team. Lynx is also able to solo sustain with a positive skill point aspect. She can go lower, especially if she's trying to apply taunts to her allies that want to get hit, such as Clara, Blade, and Yunli. But nonetheless, in standard play, if you are trying to maximize your skill points on your DPSs, she would be able to provide full skill points. She has a much higher debuff prevention because she has a cleanse on ult, which is something that you can choose and is available during the battle and does not have to depend on her turn. On the E2, she can actually resist a debuff, and on E6, the skill use also gives the ally a 30% effect resistance as well. So great use of taunt for the destruction and preservation units that can redirect attacks, which is also quite strategic. Natasha, one of the first free healers in the game, she can solo sustain and can be skill point positive as well. She would generally not be using skill, as her skill does not provide anything more than a cleanse and a heal, and you wouldn't want to use skill that often, so she's much lower than the other units. I put her at a 2 because if she has to use her skill, she's not providing the skill point positivity. March 7th, it is possible to solo sustain. With her freeze abilities and the amount of shields that she can apply, she is very skill point negative, almost having to put a shield every single turn, or if you're lucky, every other turn. Um, but when she does apply a shield, it does cleanse a debuff, and as she is actively doing it very often, she is a little bit higher on the debuff resistance scale out of 4. She does have 3 counters at E4, and she does have an AoE ult that does have the ability to freeze. And her freeze is also an aspect that can contribute to how much resistant that your team can be, because when they're frozen, they won't be able to apply as much damage to your team. The Fire MC is a highly overlooked and disregarded sustain unit because of the low shield amount, and to solo sustain it is very hard. If you were to, which few people have actually attempted, you would have to taunt nearly every single turn, and the skill point positivity is really just all negatives from here. Almost taking necessitarily taking one skill point. And if she does, though, it is possible to resist more of the debuffs from your team, because the Fire MC would be taking it due to the taunt action. So I put her at a 4 because the debuffs go toward the taunted Fire MC. There is an AoE ult, and the taunt debuff can trigger some niche things like the trend of the universal market for Acheron team compositions, but overall, it is a very hard unit to sustain with, even if you max defense and max damage taken. So if I compile everything, our limited sustains on the left, and compared with a Wally, many units actually are fully skill point positive, and with the exception of Fushan, Huo Huo, March 7th, and Fire MC. Nobody is able to reach the debuff prevention that Wally can, which completely negates all incoming debuffs. Uh, However, some people come close, like Huo Huo, with the when you skill, you cleanse when the ally takes a turn, as well as adventuring with the 50% effect resistance. That's the closest as we're going to get. Some units have absolutely no debuff prevention, like Bailu and Japard, and just take it on the chin. And we can see that the limited sustains generally have a higher debuff prevention. I've included some of the other aspects of each unit and highlighted some of the ones that I think are substantial in green, and some of the ones that are less substantial in orange. But when we compare our limited sustain, they have similar SP gains. Huohuo and Fushuan have lower SP gains, but they have other compensation. Fire MC and March 7th have negative SP, but may have some other niche effects. And they have far more debuff resistance, and so they will have a more consistent experience and reduce the need for hitting the restart button. There is, however, a sense of power creep, and highlighting Luocha, for example. His SP generation is tried and true, it is a full 1, but there's a lot of other standard units that can match that in SP generation, even Gallagher, who can actually exceed it. His debuff prevention's more like a 5 that I've rated, but Lynx herself actually can do a lot with the debuff resistance from her skill, which makes her immune. However, you wouldn't be using skill, but her AoE ult can apply a full healing and cleanse the team from debuff by choice. So it is arguable about how Luocha compares with someone like Lynx and Gallagher. So one of the problems with sustain is that it's hard to improve upon it. We've already reached some cap characters such as adventuring, who can provide all the skill point positivity and resist all the debuffs. We're coming very close. Uh, is it possible that there's going to generate a need for more solo sustain? It could, but if we had harder content with more damage and effects, it would actually be a power creep to the previous units, such as people who are on the edge, like Luocha, Bailu, and Japard. I don't know if the company is willing to invalidate these units just yet. Maybe there's a way that we can improve debuff resistance, but debuff resistance is losing to debuffs is already a low cause of death and can be reset through. Is there a way that we can make it more SP positive? That's kind of hard because most units actually are already +1 on skill points, and even Gallagher, who's beyond that. More SP generation from your sustains may actually lead to negative balancing effects on Sparkle and Hanya, who are expected to be the main skill point generators for the game. We are actually already quite close to the ideal sustain. So, is there a way to make sustain great again? We can't. We have ways that we are already inching towards a multiple role unit, such as amplifying. Huo Huo can do the sustain. She costs some skill points, but she can also be energy generation and attack buffing as well. Adventuring has damage from his follow-up, and Gallagher has super break abilities, so we can have sustains leeching into the multiplier amplification roll and also putting out damage themselves. There's also ways that we can turn shields and heals into damage, and we have examples of that already in Simulated Universe, where shields become Quake, and heals and HP are associated with Dewdrop. Another way that we can increase the necessity of sustains is we can have increased damage taken while also outputting more damage. And this is kind of like a high risk, high reward, a double or nothing ability or unit that you can stack on. And this encourages us to bring more heavily needed sustains, things that can sustain more, even a double sustain. In exchange for being able to output more damage. So if there's a unit that would take more and also deal more out in reward for it, it would help. It could be really useful as an endgame selectable buff if you choose to. And a unit's relic set that could really help to identify this, and you could choose to say, hey, this unit will be taking extra damage and we'll have to do extra sustain support on it in exchange for being output more damage. And this can really bring back the need for a sustain in the current meta. Now, I have been pretty negative towards limited sustains, and for full transparency, I have never pulled for a limited sustain. I have gotten by passively with Bailu and Japard Lynx and Fire MC March 7th and the Trailblazer. I wouldn't say my experience has been super smooth because I've had to restart, but it is possible. And if you want to play for the fun factor, the ability to cruise through content, and that's your idea of fun, pulling a sustain, or if you like the character, is very useful and valuable. Nothing to say negatively there. However, if you want to invest more in damaging dealers, interactions with those characters, the sustains provide a role that is far less interesting or novel than the damaging and amplifying units generally. So, if needed, the first unit class that I would cut to hold back on would be the sustain class, because I see far more potential and options in the amplifying and damaging roles. So, to consider at the end, we have units like Linksha and future ones. So, when considering them, you want to think about, are they able to solo sustain? In the current state, they're expected to solo sustain. Are they skill point positive? If they cost skill points, if they need to use it every 1 in every 3 turns, that's something to think about. And we will have to determine if that trade-off is valuable or not. Is the debuff prevention high enough? So if there's a way that they're able to pretty much resist all debuff, cleanse all debuffs in a very timely manner that doesn't affect your team state, that's going up in the list. And if there's other effects, this is the area where there is a great deal of potential, other effects for buffing themselves doing damage, then that could be very useful. So, for example, attack instances could really benefit a unit that depends on attack frequency. And maybe that's the novelty that could be worth pulling a sustain unit. So that's all for this. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments.